Hey, what's up? What's up? It's Winning Wednesday. Mike Phillips here with the Leadership Toolkit. Thank you for taking your time to tune in and join me today. We do this every single Wednesday where I have awesome leaders from many different verticals of business that I have the opportunity to interview. You have the opportunity to listen and learn and grow from their successes, and certainly to learn from and hopefully not repeat those failures and those roadblocks that we encounter so often in life. So today is no different. I am excited to have a new friend on the show today. Her name is Zeina Habib. She's a coach and corporate trainer who helps clients become more confident and build better relationships. She uses the body mind method to be able to help them understand themselves, recognize their strengths and their struggles, and recognize that in other people so that they can grow into better leaders and better people. And we had a minute to talk here just beforehand, and I am really excited to bring Zeina on the show today. Welcome to the Leadership Toolkit, Zeina Habib. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, if you would just take a minute or two, a couple minutes, and share with the audience what your background is, what your leadership experience is, and management experience. This is one of the things I love. We started talking for a minute beforehand, and like I said, man, you just light up when you started sharing that. And I said, hold that thought. We gotta get live here. So if you would share that with the audience right now.
Sure. So I'm originally from Beirut, Lebanon. I have been in the US for 5 years, lived for a year before in Belgium to do my master's. My original background was actually in construction. I was a civil engineer. And partway through my, construction career, I was kind of facing a difficulty with communication. I was working in Lebanon. I was like a woman among 30, 35 men. And I got to a point where things felt difficult. I was unhappy. And I wasn't understanding what was happening. So someone recommended this communication training. I go there and I start taking the training, and they look at me and they're like, "You're actually good at this. Do you want to train with us?" So I start training with them to become a coach, get my certification to the US in coaching, and then do my master's, move to the US. And when I move here, I'm like, I need to do something. I need to start a new activity as a new expat. So I started dancing, and I think that part of my life changed me completely. There's just something about movement, something about being connected to other on the dance floor that really got to me. And that is the moment I started to think, what does it look like to get the dancing and the passion for dancing into my passion to listening to others and being there for them? So I started researching, found a lot of work with the body and the mind and leadership, and got more training. And this is how the body mind connection came to life, where I just work with people and help them understand how does, anxiety work in their body? How does, when they feel like they're an imposter, how does that show up in their body, and how does it show up in their mind? And how working with both can truly affect how they show up as a leader and their decision making. And I think this is what I really love, seeing others thrive, become more confident, making their choices, and build true relationships that I really, really want to maintain.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And like I said, you just light up when you talk about it. So it makes me want to talk more, or have more conversation about it. Not me talk more, hear you talk more. So a couple of things that I keyed in on when you're saying, hey, there's that connection of mind and body and so forth and dance. Before we dive down that path, I'm curious, what kind of dance? You said you started dancing. What was the type that you were participating in?
So I started in ballroom, but after
Okay.
that, a year or two in, I moved more into the Latin dance, so the salsa, the bachata, the zouk. But it's mostly for me partner dance, and just Latin music.
Oh, that's awesome. My wife did dance for years, forever, and then my daughter does gymnastics, and that incorporates some elements of dance. Nothing probably that extensive, but I always think it's something that is so amazing to watch. Just the grace and the way that people move. And what's really cool, like if you've seen on some of these uh, shorts and stuff that they show up, like the instant ballroom dancing or the instant. I don't even know the title for it, but where they pair two like blind couples. Have you ever done that?
Jack and Jill's. It's called Jack
Jack
and
and Jill.
Jill's.
Okay. So have you done that?
Yes, that's basically what we do because we go social dancing. So you go into a
Mhm.
place and then random people dance with each other on different songs.
That I've watched some of that. I cannot imagine. Maybe it's just because I'm so uncoordinated, but I think that is something that's so cool because you have to like instantly connect with the other person and such as well. So I'm curious because you were talking, so now we'll go down this path. So thank you for sharing first off, and thank you so much for being on the show with me today. Before I get too far ahead, I told you I get sidetracked and we start talking right away. I'm going to throw this up on the screen. You can connect with Zeina on LinkedIn. So you go to linkedin.com/n/Zeina Habib, Habib. You can connect on LinkedIn. You can also check out her website, which is voice-within.com. And so as we go through this conversation and this journey, if you'd like to connect with Zeina more, make sure that you check out those places. So I'm curious, you said, hey, I started to notice this mind body connection. Do you remember what was the linchpin for you? What was the thing that you said, okay, I notice if I'm doing this in dance and it's putting me this other place in my mind. Can you articulate for me? How did you realize that connection? And then how did you start to apply that to business?
So I think it was multiple moments. I love this question because it kind of puts me into also a thinking mindset. I think the first one was just moving, and after dancing and moving, the amount of stress and just like how my body suddenly calms down and comes to a place of peace. I think that was the first thing. I'm like, oh, okay, like everyone talks about sports and movement and how it affects you, so I was like, okay, great. And then I start noticing that, in ballroom dancing or in Jack and Jills and all of that, you have to be very connected to your partner. And there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of mistakes that happen and a lot of back and forth. And what does that mean in communication? Because we do that every day in our, communication with others, in our conversations with others. And then I got more into the science of movement because I took a theater class into it. And I realized that, like, a lot of the movement, they teach you how to, like, as actors, how to act something based on a type of movement. And what does that mean? How can we use all of these techniques to show up in our body differently? Because as
Sure.
a coach, you feed into the person, how they act, how they show up. I've had a lot of clients say something, but their face and their body saying something completely different. And all of that started to click. And I did the research and learned more about it. And I think the biggest thing for me was I'm someone who was generally an anxious personality. Like, I'm high energy and I do have an anxious just energy. So
I
I started
understand that.
to, yeah, and I started to realize how dancing affected that. How being in my body taught me I was able to change my energy without needing an outside factor to do that. And all of this through the movement and the dance and the expression itself. So this is how I kind of got, okay, let's learn more about that. Let's see how I can help others do the same.
No, I think it's fantastic. And it's one of those, like, I remember even now it puts me back when I first started dating my wife, and it's one of those things that she was saying too. Like, you start to dance and you start to move. You can't stay anxious. You can't stay sad. You can't. It moves you to a place. And I remember fast forward in business years later, somebody saying to me, when I was learning to sell, they said, you got to get people moving. You got to get people incorporated. You got to get them engaged because motion creates emotion. And I thought that was a really powerful statement. So, how did that at the beginning, when you realized that and you started taking these classes on communication and movement and the things that you were learning about and then starting to teach on, how would you say that transcends to business and to leadership?
Um, I think for me it was the conversations I had with people, because I
Okay.
started getting clients who were leaders. I started getting clients, and at first it's a bit unsettling because I'm generally a younger person than some of the leaders I've been coaching.
Sure.
And you learn things, and then you're coming into this room and sitting with someone who has like years and years of experience into something. And then you sit there and then you
Mhm.
realize one thing is this person needs someone to listen to them, needs someone to sit there, takes in what they're saying, be curious, and just ask questions that they haven't thought about. That's one. And the second thing, it's I learned a lot, like, from my life experience, from the
Mhm.
moving, from the courses and everything, and from the work I've done on myself as a coach. I started to work with myself, how to work on my difficult relationships and how to push myself in dancing, a world I've never been in since I was young, coaching leaders I've never talked to. So all of that requires courage, requires confidence, requires building relationship. And I realized that those people are not coming to ask me about how to run their business. They're coming to me for the small tips on the things I've done, which it doesn't matter where you're at. Everyone faces those things. Like, I was always surprised that I would be talking to someone with 25 years of experience that I would admire, who would
Hmm.
still sometimes has imposter syndrome, who still sometimes feel like they're not good enough, who still struggles with a relationship because they don't know how to relate to, like someone they're managing that is very young, that has an energy that is different than theirs. And I got to the point where I'm like, these are skills that anyone can apply, because leadership is about showing up. It's about building those relationships. It's about listening. It's about making decisions. And these are tips that I could help them with, not necessarily by telling them how to live their life, but by listening to them and just offering a pool of tips that may or may not work for them.
So I really like the direction that you're going with this, and I've got a couple of questions. I wrote down a few things so that I want. You never know where I'm going to come from. It's like surprise. Here's the. You've brought up listening several times. You said, "Hey, people that are in this position need somebody to listen to them." And from my take, one of the things that I'm hearing you say is like part of it is because those leaders and the people that get into that role, myself, I've been in a leadership role 25, 30 years now. And so you get set in your ways. Let's be honest. I mean, somebody like myself, I get set in my ways. And when you're saying you need somebody to listen to them, I think so often people have this expectation, outside people, and especially the followers and people you lead have this expectation that the leader at the top, that well, that they have all the answers, so I'm going to go to them and get this answer, versus sometimes what I'm hearing you say is they need a sounding board. They need somebody to communicate back and forth. Do you think that listening is a skill that can be developed, and where do you start? Like, how do you create that relationship of communication and quality listening? What do you do to start laying that groundwork?
100% think that listening is the most important leadership skill.
Okay.
I'm going to use something you said before the show. Sorry about that. But you were saying
Yes,
about you want to help people win more. You know
absolutely.
what I want to say? How do they know what it looks like for them to win? What does it mean for them? Forget about the rest of the world, to win. If they're not listening to themselves and listening to others, I can't help you win if I don't know what win means to you. I can't help this company thrive if I don't know what my clients want, if I don't know what my employees want, if I don't know, if I'm not listening to what others are saying. I'm never changing, I'm never growing, and I'm never following this ever changing market. So it's not you're listening to others, to yourself, to a market. You just gotta take in some information and know how to be able to filter what matters and what doesn't, and which information to use and which not to use. You gotta be able to empathize, to connect to others. And to answer part of your question, it is a teachable skill. For most people, I'm not talking about, there are people, there's, narcissistic personalities, there's people maybe who are not ready to be coachable. Like, that is a
Sure.
thing. But for most people, this is a skill that can be learned. This is a skill that I have a book coming out, an ebook coming out soon, that talks about this,
Okay.
like simply tips on active listening. How do you become a good active listener? And when I say active listener, it means like not just listening to take information from me, not
Sure.
just listening to learn something new, but listening to me and you at the same time. What does that mean? You say something, there's a part of me that's reacting, that's thinking inside my head. How can I be the observer on what does the reaction happen within me? What are the things that you are bringing at me? And be as impartial as possible when I'm coming back at you with a question or an answer. How can I show up with a beginner's mindset? You're talking about leadership. If I'm talking to you, how can I be a complete beginner as if I don't know what leadership is and ask you about it so I learn what your point of view is without having everything in my head distort that? So it's a lot of exercises that can be done. We do improv acting, we play around with things, we just let people play around with those skills. And I say build them slowly without judgment, because it's hard. Like, even for me now, I talk. My mind works fast. So if I'm not coaching, sometimes I will interrupt. I'll be in action mode, and then I
Sure.
have to bring myself back in. I have to be like, okay, no, back down, present. What is the other person trying to say? Why am I here with them? What is this connection telling me?
I really like a lot of your answers to this stuff. One of the questions that I have, then this leads me down a couple of different paths. You said approach things with a beginner's mindset. You've said, or I said earlier, to paraphrase something you said, motion creates emotion. You said that you get people acting and moving and so forth. Do you find it difficult, because you're a corporate leadership trainer and coach? Do you find it difficult sometimes? Because I mean, I'll be very straightforward. Like, there's times that I go in and there's this wall of ego, right? Isn't there? Do you find it difficult to connect and get people that are at top levels of leadership to, for lack of a better term, loosen up?
So I'll tell you this.
Yes.
Most of the time now, I have developed the intuition of when to go there or when to retract back.
Okay.
And I mean, it's such a difficult thing because it is and it's not. Because here's the trick. First of all, when you're going into a coaching session, if you are wanting to do the coaching, if you are choosing to do the coaching, you're going into the space where no one in your life has access. You're completely in a space that is safe and that is sacred. So
Sure.
there's a part of your ego that, if you have a good coach, can simply drop down because the stakes are so low in that space. You're just in a
Hmm.
very free space. That's one. Two, in cases where it's not, I take the logical way. I go with them. Like, I use the body mind connection, but smartly. I will not go into the body with someone who's not like there yet. I'll go
Okay.
around it. I'll be like, hey, when you're anxious, what happens in your body? Because that's biology. That's like something very logical and relatable. So and there are people who are very spiritual. I am maybe not as spiritual, but I can use where they're at to get them there. So I think it's about not being very attached to what you believe in. Because in this session, it's not about me, it's about this leader coming in. And how can I get them to where they want, not by the means I want to, by whatever means they need, whatever needs that will help them get there, even if I have to retract and change and try things around before we get there.
I love that. One of the things I've shared before, what I'm hearing you say is a little bit of, be more in love with the goal. What's the end game than the direct path or journey that you're getting there, right? Because everybody's going to be unique. And, I think that's really powerful. I was going to say, so you don't go right in and you're like, hey, salsa dance, let's go.
No, you have some people that will never get, like, it's hard.
I think that would be fun. I think it'd be a whole new method. So let me ask you also, when you brought up a couple other really good points. One of the things you said a few minutes ago, you said, hey, the number one leadership trait as you see it is listening. What are the next four? So if number one is listening, can you give me four more? What are the key things that leaders should possess, and maybe things that they should and could develop from your perspective?
So, awareness of the body, and so awareness of the body, the emotions, and the mind. You can separate
Okay.
those, but like self-awareness of, I may not be able today to change to the ideal self, but
Mhm.
I can catch myself. Like, sometimes I'll be dancing and my teacher will see me be like, because she knows that I didn't correct the mistake, but I caught the mistake. I think sometimes having the self awareness of, I know I'm good here. I know I'm really good at this, but I know this is where I struggle. And catching yourself doing it is very important because it's a step forward and it's a step of how you start creating change. Having compassion for self
Compassion.
and others, because no one thrived by critiquing themselves so harshly. I mean, at least in my perspective, because my answer to winning is holistic. So if you're succeeding in something but you're burning out, that's not success to me. So kind of having that compassion for self and for others,
Okay.
and being able to hold the positive and the negative together. I think we tend to either be, when you're making a decision as a leader, there's always a risk. And you being super positive and ignoring the risk, that's not going to help you. But being so scared not to make a decision that you can't see the beauty also doesn't make you a good leader. So there takes a certain amount of capacity, whether emotional capacity to hold the negative and positive emotions, or simply the capacity to know that there's a risk and know that you can make it through that risk. I mean, for me, that's the definition of confidence also. Um, but whatever people define this as, I want them to see it that way.
I no, I think that's a beautiful way to say it. And I love those. So I'm just recap. I always try and recap so that way if people are taking notes, and especially so that I can get it into the show notes later as well. So just leadership traits that you should possess or have developed in Zeina's point of view is, she said, listening, which I think is super powerful, and I agree with you. I think you can develop it. You said awareness of body and awareness of emotion. I put those as two separate things. So sort of that um, global self-awareness, if it were, right? And then I love the fact that you said compassion, having, and I love the fact that you said compassion for yourself. I think it's so easy, especially right now, to be hard on yourself in current business, current environments, and so forth. There's so much that is relatable to me, that there's this certain level with, we were talking right beforehand, like with AI and with social media, we're so visible and everything's just supposed to be perfect, right? And it's like, no, we live in an imperfect world and we're imperfect people. And so having that compassion, and then I noted on here, having grace for others as well. And then closing that, you summed up, and I don't know how you could I don't know that I should reword it, and I don't know how one would reword it. I think it was perfectly stated when you said holding the positive and negative together, and having that capacity to be real with where you're at, both on the good and the bad. Man, I think that is so powerful. I really think it's powerful. So thank you for sharing that. Um, so one of the things that you've said and that you stated also right before we went on, you'd commented about, okay, well, how, and you said this just now, having an awareness of I don't know why I'm having such a tough time. Mind and body. Having an awareness of body and mind will help leaders grow further. So let's say, whether I'm new to leadership or if I'm somebody that's been there for, we brought up earlier, 25 years, and I know there's a need to grow. Like that, at that, there's that seed and that need. And I say, okay, well, I got to move to this next level. If you're coaching them, where do you start?
I always start with definitions. And that is, for me right now, as you're talking, is what does it mean to grow? What does it mean for them to grow? What does that look like?
Okay.
So, kind of being able to draw, define, feel the person they want to become.
Okay. And so what happens, do you ever have a situation where you start to have that session, you start to have the conversation, you say, hey, what does it mean to grow? And they tell you one thing and you go, that's not it. Do you ever
Oh,
have
yeah.
a time where you've had to come back at the person and help realign them? And can you
Uh,
expand on
um,
that some?
so I'll tell you that's 95% of my coaching session. And we'll
Okay.
say this because a lot of people come in, like you have the confidence, the relation. Everyone comes in, I want to be more confident. And then I ask them what it means. And the most common answer is like, I just want to be like that person that goes into the meeting and looks like they're not scared of anything and like they know everything and everything is great. I think we all go into coaching sessions with this Instagram, social media kind of view of what we see, and we want to be that. And that is every person, like we just see the outside and we want to be that sometimes. Or sometimes our definition are defined by other people. Like I want to be like this because my manager wants me to be like this, or I want to get there because that's how my society is. I think when we get there, my first thing is to get to the why, to understand, how you talked about me and my passion, to get
Hmm.
people to that space where they're shining because it just happens naturally, instead of coming up with words that they've heard on the internet, or that will take away that discomfort. I think this is another thing. I think we're trying so hard to be happy all the time, or to take away a level of discomfort we have in ourselves, that we're escaping it. Like, we're trying to escape the discomfort, that we're not trying to understand whether that discomfort is trying to say something to us, or what it's like to lean into it, what it's like to understand what is that pain we want to solve, what is that thing we want to move towards. So I think that's it. I think I make the conversation as uncomfortable as it should be to get them where they want to get.
And so when you're saying you make it uncomfortable for them, or as uncomfortable as where they want to get, what are some of the questions? Let's dive a little bit deeper on that. What are some of the questions that you might ask somebody? So if because I think some of this translates, like you're coaching leaders to move forward and be better leaders. And one of the things we're having a discussion on here is, how do leaders coach people to be, better employees, better followers, better at what it is that they do. So when you say uncomfortable, can you expand on that a little bit? What does that look like? And maybe what are some sample questions that, if I'm in a leadership role and I'm trying to coach somebody on my team along, what are some sample questions that I might pursue with them?
So I'll be I'm going to start this with a bit of an intro, just because I would be careful if I'm using them as a leader, because I would ask, the first question is, how much level of trust is there already established to go to these questions? How much does the person feel comfortable with me? And how much of, because as a leader talking to your report, you need to share some level of vulnerability with them, to
Mm-hmm.
know that they are really heard, that it's not someone coming up from a higher position on top of them. As a coach, you kind of have already, you kind of have that established based on the relationship that you've established.
Sure.
It happens that way, because as a
Because
coach.
people are coming to you in that coaching relationship. They're already,
Exactly.
it's expected. I get that.
Yeah, so I think that's the first thing. So once that is there, some of the things I do is, a lot of people will talk something and their face will say something else, and I can tell them their body's going either about to cry, or like there's just something, an emotion hitting there. So I will simply pause and say, hey, and I may be wrong here, and I start always with that to give them the control, because no one wants to feel like control is being taken away from them. So I always start with, I may be wrong on this, but I can see a certain emotion on your face. What's happening? What is going on there? Would you like to talk about it? And I dive into it. I will sometimes push with why questions. So sometimes we'll come, and sometimes someone will come and say, I feel uncomfortable being on a Zoom meeting showing my face. Why? I don't know. I just feel like people will look at me and start judging me. Why? What happens if they judge you? I will feel like I'm being rejected. Why? What happens if you're being rejected? So I use what we call the 5 whys, which is
I
basically
love that.
diving. Yeah, we keep diving until we get to the root cause of the problem. And the root cause is never pretty. It's always about failure. It's always about rejection. It's always about the fear of being alone. It's always about those things. And this is an ugly place to be. But if you don't go there, you don't grow. If you're not ready to take those risks and dive into those places, you're not going to get there. Some of the other things I would do with some of my clients, which I think are easier conversations to have as leaders, and I always tell my leaders to start with it, is start meetings, if they're having team meetings, with a vulnerable question. Like, what was the best thing and the worst thing about your weekend? What, like, what do you love about having this meeting here? Like, just something that makes people dive into some vulnerability that is sometimes positive, but sometimes a bit harder,
Hmm.
to create that connection.
No, I like that. Here's a question I have for you, because I really like the 5 whys. I've used that before numerous times, and I think it's super powerful to get people down to what the root is, just as you're saying. And I want to explore on that here in just a second. But before we go there, actually, a couple other things. If people are just tuning in, and if you didn't hear before, as Zeina and I are getting into this conversation, because she's awesome and I've enjoyed this so far. I don't even know how many things I've written down to ask. It's more than we'll get to in the show. Um, if you want to connect with Zeina Habib, you can connect with her on LinkedIn. Easy to find. Just you can search for Zeina Habib, ZeinaHabib. The LinkedIn link there is on the screen. And also check out our website if you're interested in coaching, corporate coaching, consulting. Check out thevoice-within.com. So you make sure and do that. I'll have that in the show notes as well. Where I want to venture to is if I'm in a leadership role, because you and I may not see eye to eye on that, because you're saying, well, you might not ask the same questions as a leader to your reports. I think you should. But what I want to know is, because one of the things that you said, and I think this is something that everybody needs to gauge, is how much trust and how comfortable is the person with you. So how can a leader, what actions could a leader take? Because I try and give tangible things. What actions do you think somebody in leadership can take to help develop trust with their reports?
I mean, I think one of the most important thing is to care, like to truly, truly care. No one's humans, whether through actions or a sense of, the body presence or like watching you act with other people, we can always tell there's something where you're like, there's just something in me, an intuition that tells me I can't truly trust this person. They can always
Okay.
tell. You can't fake caring. So really
Agree.
caring. And what I mean really caring is sometimes it's hard because your report might want to change team because they like this function. They like to grow into management and you're doing technical. It means caring more about this person reaching their goal and the place they want to reach than you and your team. And that is a big thing. And making your report see them and understand that and asking them questions, being the curious person about those things and taking the steps slowly that show them that what you care about is their well-being, like truly doing that. So I think like putting their well-being and as a priority. I'm not saying also as a business person, you have to care about business, but you have to find that balance. You have to make sure that when you have to make difficult business decisions that doesn't align with their well-being, that you're having this conversation. Don't run away from this conversation. Don't be like, it's okay, they'll get over it. No, you have to show up in the hard times. Like it's ugly, but if you don't do it, that is worse than just letting them stay in it. Or like it's ugly for people to suffer alone. You being there, they may not react and show you that like they're excited that you showed up, but it doesn't matter. You have to make that difficult decision anyway. So caring, being there in the difficult places, and asking questions, like literally being curious. If someone comes to you and says, I want a promotion. Oh, it's interesting. I'm curious. What do you want that promotion for? What do you think it's going to add to you? And literally caring about the answers.
How would you say that somebody can demonstrate that they care about the answers?
Um, I mean, curiosity is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not looking for you to give me an answer I like. I'm looking for you to give me the true answer. So I'm not judging whatever answer you give me. So when you get that, go ahead.
No, and I think that's really good. I think so often human nature dictates that like we have our model of the world. And so when somebody's having that conversation, it's easy for us to fall into the shell and retract back and go, well, that's not how I see it. And so I do think that what you're saying is really valuable. It's important to come around to the other side of the table, so to speak, right? And sit where they're at, just with a completely unhindered, not what your view is, but what truly is the best for the person that you're talking to. I think that's really, really powerful. How do you because one of the things you brought up a few times is difficult feedback. Said, okay, I got it. If I've got a difficult message to deliver, if I have something that's not so awesome, right? We talk so much about the successes and the awesome stuff on this show. Like that's the easy stuff. That's the fun stuff. You reap the rewards. But when you have something that you've got to face, such as, letting an employee go for underperformance, letting an employee go because they're being promoted to another position, letting your entire staff know that maybe the company is not financially in the position that they need to be, or not headed in the direction that they need to be, whatever that difficult delivery may be. um, how do you how do you first recommend for somebody in a leadership role to approach that? Because I mean, you said, hey, make sure that you're direct. Like, do you have a framework or something you'd recommend as far as here's how you should approach that?
First of all, it's horrible. I'm going to use this word, and I don't know if it's wrong to use it, but it sucks. That's the first thing when my client's talking about something. I'm like, it does. Like, there's no
Yep.
other word for it. It's really horrible to have to be in this position. And you need to talk to someone freely about it, how horrible it is. You need to have your own support system in that moment, whether it's, your partner at home, your family, your friend, or someone at work that you can talk to them about. Because when you go into this room with this person, your
Mhm.
emotions don't, it's not that they don't matter, but they can't take the space. This person is hearing something difficult, they matter. In that moment, they're the center, they're that what matters. So you can't be thinking about, I'm not going to be liked. You can't be thinking about what's happening to them, what's going to do to you. Like, you can't project your emotions, you can't project your stuff onto them, because
Sure.
it's their space that you're trying to create a space for them. So you have to come in prepared. You have to come in strong for that. And to do that, you can't ignore your emotions. You don't want to become a psycho who doesn't care about firing others, because that's not good. You have to care. But at the same time, in that moment, your emotions are not what matters. So I think being able to have that space for yourself to acknowledge those emotions, and knowing that you need to acknowledge them, knowing that they're normal, knowing that you need to be having them and dealing with them before you go in there. And just don't, I mean, say positive things, but don't over say. You know how, like, when you're trying to be like, oh, you're the best person, it's not you, it's me. Don't do the fake stuff. I think that's worse.
Good.
I think that's hyper, like, that's very hypocritical. I think I said it right.
Yes.
That is not helpful. So say the real positive things. Say the things that will help this person, which is, I know you can make it because I've seen you get out of difficult situation here and here and here. But don't try to, like, sandwich it between two positive comments. I don't think that's helpful. I think being real is better.
It's so funny that you bring that up, because I've had several people, like we talked about, one of my good friends, Ian, he's been on the show a few times, and he and I've talked, and he's like, the sandwich method, he's like, it sucks. It's like, oh, you're really good at this, and I really love you a lot, and by the way, in the middle here, you suck. And he's like, it's just the worst. Like, people know if you got to deliver that stuff, just deliver it. So I broke this down because I wrote it down as you were talking, and I you have such eloquent answers and a way of sharing this. I really like it. Because I said, how do you deal with difficult situations? And I wrote down four things, but I want to add a fifth too. And I'm just going to recap this for people listening, and I would recommend you write it down. The very first thing that she said was acknowledge it. Like, you have to acknowledge how horrible it is, whatever the situation, or acknowledge what the situation is, the realness of it, right? Because sometimes it may not be a completely horrible situation, but it's a necessary situation, and you have to acknowledge that. The second thing I heard you say is, remember, it's their space, it's their emotional space for them to take in. Third, and I think this is so important, be prepared. You can't just go in and wing it when it comes to important information. You can't just go in and wing it. And then three, or excuse me, four, you sort of brought up, you said, well, you got to remove the emotion from yourself. And it doesn't mean, what I don't think you meant is, like, not to be emotionless, but it goes back to what you said before, was being able to hold the positive and negative side by side.
Yeah. Can I
And
say one thing about this? Sorry to
absolutely.
interrupt.
No,
So
absolutely.
what I mean about this is, if they start yelling and making you feel guilty, that guilt you're feeling is not what matters. What matters is you validating, I get it. I get why you're angry. You may be feeling guilt, but your guilt right now is not the one that needs to come out. You can't say, oh yeah, I feel guilty about it, because it's not about you. It's about you listening and taking it in and understanding your emotion exists. But then when you go out, you can deal with those. That's kind of what I meant by that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And here's the fifth thing. And this is something you did not say,
Go
Zaina.
ahead.
And this is something that people need to acknowledge. This is what I picked up from hearing you. It takes a human moment. Like, you need to deliver that stuff in person. It's not an email. It's not a text. You know, granted that are there times for that? Yes, you may be managing a team that's all over the country and so forth, but when possible, one of the things I sort of picked up from you was the best way to deliver that sort of feedback, deliver that information and so forth, it should be human. It should be face to face. Even if it's a Zoom call like this, like care enough about the person to pick up the phone and have a conversation. Sit face to face with them on Zoom, sit face to face in an office. Don't just deliver an email and pack your things and see ya. Am I right in hearing that from you?
100%. I mean, it's easy to do that. It's easy to send the email and not have to deal with the aftermath.
Absolutely. So as we come to the tail end here, we're just in the 40-minute mark, the 45-minute mark. We've covered a lot of ground. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share? Any nuggets of wisdom or something that you say, man, hey Mike, we didn't get to this, but here's something that I definitely want to share with your audience. Any final thoughts to take us out?
I think two quick things from everything. I mean, I want people to remember as they're listening to this that it's not, you don't listen to this, wake up and everything's changed. Don't
Right.
be too hard on yourself. Like, don't try to change 500 things at the same time. Pick one small thing and be, hey, I want to get better there. And just put effort into it and practice it. Like, practice, practice, practice. So, two things: be easy on yourself, understanding, pick one thing and just keep practicing it until you get it right. And don't just give up because, some hurdle happened.
I love that. And I mean, the reality is on anything, on any skill you want to get better at. If you want to get better at management, you want to get better at leadership, you want to get better at communication or listening, whatever it is that gets repeated gets learned. When you practice your way to perfection. You don't start there. So I absolutely love it. A couple reminders for everybody here. If you want to connect with Zeina on her LinkedIn, you can go to linkedin.com/n/Zeina Habib, ZEINAHABIB, or you can go to for corporate coaching, consulting, anything else. If you want to dive in even deeper with Zeina and have her coach you or your team or just get connected with her, you can check that out at voice-within.com. So Zeina, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a really fun conversation to have.
Absolutely. And I'd love to have you back sometime. There's, I think, a bunch more that we could dive into. If you would just hang out for just a moment, I'm going to go ahead and take us out. So that, my friends, is going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in and join me and Zeina Habib. Again, just a wealth of knowledge. I'd go back and listen to this, and I will tell you more than anything, because I value your time. And I love having conversations with people like this, because she has so much wisdom to share and is able to break things down like, hey, do these steps, follow this thing. And you can tell she really cares about people. So if you know somebody that would grow and gain something in their life from this message, please do me a favor. First, throw some thumbs up on the show, because that's one of the ways that we grow on Apple and Spotify and YouTube. But more than anything, if you want to make a difference for somebody, share the show with them. Somebody that could use this message, share the show, because that's a way for you to be impactful. And maybe it's you. Go back and listen to it again. But if there's somebody in your life that you say, man, they could really use this, send it to them, because I think that's just a great way to help impact somebody else. So thank you, everybody, for joining me today on the Leadership Toolkit. Until I see you next Wednesday, stay great. We'll talk soon, everybody.